turning the mic on? Oh, it is on. Okay. Oops. If everyone could take their seats, please. Excuse me, if everyone could start taking their seats, we're going to start the next panel.
And you just need to, clicker is right here. You just need to click through, and then...
So how do I make sure I get it up?
I'm super short. Okay. I did this again.
But I'm not.
You're the next one.
So I hit this?
Excuse me, if everyone could take their seats.
Cool.
Should I start calling people's
Great.
names?
Hello.
You are...
I'm John. Possibly not. Okay.
Okay. Before we start, I'm just going to make an announcement that because we have this extra long break now, we're going to not have the break between this panel and the next one. We'll go right one into the other to save time. So, welcome back. We've heard, some good, some bad information this morning about the state of money in elections and what we can do about it. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about, what's working and how these models can be spread. And as we've heard a lot today, we know that from our research in New York City and the research of others about the New York City program, that the New York City Small Dollar Matching Funds program is working in New York City. It's working to encourage small contributions, it's working to encourage new contributors, and it's working to encourage competitive elections. Today we're going to talk about, this panel is going to talk about how we get the return of small donor public financing at the ballot box. And we have a really interesting group of panelists. And in case anyone was worried that it was just all talk, that this is a issue that goes across the political spectrum, we have a group of panelists of 3 elected officials, 2 of whom are Republicans and 1 of whom is a Democrat. So there's definitely an issue that people across the political spectrum care about. First, though, we're going to hear from Professor John Mollenkopf, who is the director of the Center for Urban Research and a distinguished professor of political science and sociology at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he studies urban politics and policy. He's currently analyzing the impact of immigration on electoral politics in New York City, and he's going to have some interesting things to talk about how the New York City program works on voting and the distribution of contributors in New York City. After Professor Mollenkopf, we'll hear from New York City Public Advocate Letitia James. For those of you who don't know, the Public Advocate is the 2nd highest elected office in New York City. Tish is the first woman of color to hold a citywide position in New York City. She served in the City Council from 2004 to 2013, and is a 5-time participant in our Matching Funds program. We also have City Council member Eric Ulrich, who represents New York's 32nd Council District in Queens. He was first elected in a special election in 2009 at age 24. He won re-election to the council later that same year and again in 2013. He has participated in the New York City Campaign Finance Program in each of his 3 campaigns for city office. Finally, we have former Congressman Tom Petri, who served Wisconsin's 6th District from 1979 to 2015. He has a lot to say about the way money works in federal campaigning, and right now, among other active roles after he's been in Congress, he's a member of the advisory board of Issue One, which is a nonpartisan organization that works to get money out of politics. I'm eager to start our panel. All of our panelists have really interesting perspectives on the intersection between money, politics, and voters. And with that, I'll turn to Professor Mollenkopf.
Amy, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this wonderful set of conversations about this really important topic for the future of our democracy in New York City and the country as a whole. I'm going to say a few things about the trends that are indicated in this lovely set of tables that I hope you picked up outside. If you didn't, there's still a few more left out there. And I'm going to talk first about the trends in the electorate. Then I'm going to say a little bit about what we know about who's who's making the public contributions that are being matched by the CFB system. And then I'm going to conclude with a few, hopefully slightly iconoclastic thoughts about how we might improve the system. So the first thing to know is that New York City, unlike, say, Cleveland or St. Louis, is a growing city and increasingly immigrant and minority city. So, and the immigrants are gradually getting naturalized. So the potential electorate of the city is large, it's diverse, and it's been growing. And partly in reflection of that, the voter registration list has also been growing, although it tends to fluctuate because at certain points during certain elections, people who have left the city or died are removed from the rolls, and of course new people are added all the time. And at a couple of points, both in 2000 and more recently, we can compare the voter registration list with the eligible population and see that, yes, we have a pretty good registration list, more or less about 80%, but there's still about 1 million people who are citizens of voting age in New York City, for whatever reason, have declined to register. So we still have a ways to go in terms of making the eligible electorate match the theoretically potential electorate. If you go down to the rows below, it shows both the general election votes and primary election vote, Democratic primary election votes in a number of different elections, especially the municipal elections, which are in the off years of 01, 05, 09, and 13. And there you see a somewhat different trend. And except for the Obama election in 2008, where there was an upward spike in turnout to the recent high point of 62.5%, even in presidential elections, which are the ones that draw the most voters out to the polls, there's been a gradual downward drift. And you can see that also in the state elections for governor, which are 2002, 6, 10, and 14, and even more so for the municipal elections. And in the 2013 municipal election, the turnout in terms of ratio of voters to the voter registration list was only a quarter. And if you look at the Democratic primary, the turnout rates are even lower, with even though the 2013 election was open and competitive and no incumbent was dominating the scene, the turnout was larger than some of the previous primaries, but it didn't match the very important primary that took place in 2001, right after the 9/11 attacks, which was a pivotal moment for the city. Now, we can look at this and say that's not a very good record in terms of political mobilization and engagement. And all I can say in the defense of the city, I can say two things. One is that turnout is correlated with, or negatively correlated with, a lot of things that are concentrated in New York City. So homeowners are more likely to vote than people who are renters, and we have a lot of renters. People who were in low-income families are less likely to vote than people in high-income families. Immigrants are far less likely to vote than the native-born, and so forth. So we know we have a lot of obstacles to overcome to truly mobilizing everyone. But we also do better than, if you think this is bad, you could go to Los Angeles. We heard earlier about the 9% turnout in an important referendum measure there previously. And in general, LA's turnout rates, even controlling for various demographic factors, are not as good as ours. And in many other cities have rates down at this low level. I've been spending a lot of time digging into the voter registration list, the voter history list, matching how people vote in general elections and primary elections, and looking at the broad sweep of history from 2000 to the present. So I have 14, going on 15 years worth of experience. And I've discovered a couple of interesting things. One is that many, many voters only vote in general elections, and they don't vote in primaries. And they tend to vote, most likely to vote, in presidential general elections. And from a political science point of view, that's a little odd, because everybody knows the state of New York is going to go to the Democrats, and a vote cast in a general election in New York City is usually not a very important one. Nothing much in the large scheme of things turns on that. And the critical votes are in the primaries, where in a city with 70% Democratic registration, the Democratic nominee is likely to win, except in mayoral races, as we've seen over the years. And so people really ought to be motivated to vote in the primaries rather than the general election, but they don't. And people in politics often talk about prime voters, the idea that there's a core of people who vote all the time. You can count on them to vote. And most of the rest of the population is not really paying attention. So let's go look for the prime voters and mobilize them. But if you look at the actual empirical record, there aren't really very many prime voters among Democrats of people who've bothered to vote in at least one election who vote in all of them. It's a very episodic sort of thing. On the current voter registration list, only, let me get the right point in my notes here. Yes, well, among all Democrats who voted in at least one general election from 2000 to the present, 42% have never voted in a Democratic primary. And then if you look at the people who do vote in Democratic primaries, if of those who were registered since 2000 and thus had the opportunity to vote in all of the 12 general elections, and of all the voters who registered from 2000 to the present, fewer than 20% voted in 10 or more of those 12 elections. And 14.7% on the voter registration list today have never voted in any election in New York City. So that 4.2 million people, we automatically need to deduct about 1/8 of them from the list, because for whatever reason they've never engaged the political process. And then looking at the Democrats in this group that has been registered for a long time, who could have voted in 15 different primaries, only 6.6% of them had voted in 10 of those 15 primaries, while 35.9%, as mentioned before, hadn't voted in any of the primaries. So this paints a picture of a relatively small electorate that's episodically engaged, way too small an electorate, really, considering the important issues that are in front of the city regularly, and that whether you're talking about an election after the attacks of September 11th that are going to set the future of the city, or this last mayoral election, which changed the direction of the city from a mayor who, I guess at last report, was worth $35 billion to my neighbor and friend Bill de Blasio, who comes from a very different background. A relatively thin group of people, a relatively small share of people are making these decisions. And as I say, the drift has been downwards, and that's a bit troubling. Okay, let's turn to the question of contributing. And the really positive takeaway here to begin with is that people who contribute are much more likely to vote. Twice as likely in a general sense, and in Democratic primaries, 3 times as likely as people who don't contribute. So clearly the act of contributing is an extension of political engagement. It's something that people do on top of bothering to go to the polls. And the fact that we have the very substantial public match, I think, really incentivizes people to contribute, and therefore, importantly, incentivizes participation in the political process to work against this larger trend that we talked about. But one of the interesting things that we have learned in work between our center and the Campaign Finance Board is that many of the people who are making campaign contributions are not registered voters. This seems odd, doesn't it? And if you look at the table in the lower left-hand side, you can see that more than a third of the contributors are not registered voters or have not voted. So on the one hand, it's great that the people who do contribute are really much more engaged in the political process. But what can we learn? What do we think about the people who are not? And this is a question we haven't really fully answered. We're really beginning to research it. But we can say that the share of contributions from people who are not registered voters tends to be higher particularly in Asian and Latino neighborhoods that have lots and lots of immigrants. So in some sense, probably contributions are coming from people who cannot vote because they're not yet citizens, but find this alternative path into political participation. And they get a degree of contact with and relationship with elected officials in this pattern that's a little bit different from what develops between candidates and their voting base. Let me share a couple of numbers that go beyond these charts. More than half of the contribution dollars to all mayoral candidates in the 2013 election came from contributors who either weren't registered or who didn't vote in 2013, either primary or general election. And they tended to make bigger contributions on average than the voter contributors did. This breakdown was about the same for Democratic candidate Bill de Blasio's contributions, but it differed from Republican Joe Lhota. Lhota received more like 60% of his funds from people who were voters and only 40% from non-voters. And for de Blasio, 42% of his contributions came from contributors who weren't even registered. When we did some ecological regression analysis to see what factors were correlated with the share of non-registered contributors, it tends to confirm that areas with more foreign-born residents, particularly Asian and Latino immigrant areas, have the higher shares of non-voter contributors. In Queens, for example, which has many such immigrant areas, only 26.6% of the mayoral contributions came from voting contributors, and half of all contribution dollars came from non-registered contributors. The pattern, though, for the council is much different. It's much more spread out. It's much more even. Many more types of neighborhoods were involved in the contribution system. Excuse me. Let me give you one example from a specific council race, District 38, where an incumbent, Sarah Gonzalez, lost to a challenger, Carlos Menchaca, and 62% of Menchaca's dollars came from voters, while barely a quarter of Gonzalez's dollars came from voters. And this, I think, is an example of how public financing does help make such races more competitive. Now, let me conclude by a few thoughts about how to improve the system. Clearly, more competitive races with newcomer candidates or charismatic candidates like President Obama draw more voters into the arena. People vote when they're really interested in who's in the race. And certainly New York City voters are most likely to vote in presidential races, less for governor and even less for mayor. And it suggests that people are focused at the top of the political system and less focused on what's going on in their own particular neighborhood. So how can we make New York City neighborhoods more competitive and more exciting to the people who participate in our elections? There have been a couple of ideas tossed around, and the most prominent one recently was put forward or discussed by Mayor Bloomberg's last Charter Revision Commission, and that's that we move to a nonpartisan system with no party primaries and a runoff when no candidate gets 50% of the vote. And the plus on that is that everybody gets to participate in the key election. If the key election is the Democratic primary, then only Democrats get to have a say in that election and not the independents and Republicans and everyone else. So it has a certain kind of logic to it, that proposal. It sounds appealing. But the fact is that states and localities that have nonpartisan systems like this tend to have even lower turnout levels than we do. Louisiana is a state that's had the system at the state level for a long time, and they have among the lowest turnout levels of any of the states. And the municipalities of California all have nonpartisan elections. And if you systematically compare our elections with those of Los Angeles, bad as our numbers are, we consistently do better. So I don't think this is the answer, in part because parties are really the active agents of voter mobilization. It not only takes an informed and interested electorate, it takes an agent to go out there and ask people to vote, to convince them that it's important, to get them involved. And so as strange as it may seem for a person like me who's a long-time dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, although my grandparents were all Republicans, so I know a little bit about how Republicans think about the world. I think we need a stronger Republican Party in New York City. We need a party that will go out and contest these elections at the local level, at the council level, at every level, with candidates who will give the Democratic incumbents, who often have no opposition, and win re-election on very, very small, thin turnouts. Give them a run for their money. Give everybody a reason to go out there and not just rest on the voters you know will back you and hope that nobody else turns out, but really get people involved in campaign battles. I know this goes against the momentum of party registration, where more people in New York City have refused to select a party than have selected the Republican Party. But maybe we can have a revitalized Republican Party who can turn those tables. And if you don't like that idea, we used to have proportional representation for city council members in New York City. And I think a PR system in which you allocated seats to the boroughs based on their population size and then had proportional representation within the boroughs without districts, but lists of people that were competing with each other, that also might really stimulate people to organize. I spent some time once in Cambridge, Massachusetts that has such a system, and I've seen it in operation. And I know that it actually does work in terms of creating competing lists of people that battle out local elections on the basis of interesting ideas more than we currently have in our current primaries. Let me also say that in looking at the numbers of where contributors and contribution amounts come from, we clearly have a lot of work to deepen the culture of making political contributions in our are African American and Latino and immigrant neighborhoods. These groups give far less than the white middle-class neighborhoods of New York City. And to the extent that political contributions have weight in the political system, which we all know that they do, we need to democratize the culture of giving to campaigns as well as extend the culture of political participation. Well, some of what I've had to say is a little bit downbeat, but I hope to leave you really on an upbeat idea that New York City is full of very important issues that get battled out in elections. We've had really pivotal contests, especially at various important turning points in our history, like right after 9/11. And so we all have a lot of reason to get out there and widen and deepen political participation in our arena. Thank you.
Do you mind if I stand up?
You're our leader.
People who contribute get the ear of the member and the ear of the staff. They have the access, and access is it. Access is power. Access is clout. That's how this thing works. The completely frank and honest answer is that the method of campaign financing that we currently have has a serious and profound impact not only on the issues that are considered in Congress, but also the outcome of those issues. I've been a part of the system for more than 2 decades and personally raised millions in hard, soft dollars. I know that the endless pressures of raising money threaten the integrity of the legislative process and drain more and more time from my colleagues. These are actual quotes from members of Congress. And I know that I'm here to talk about the local campaign finance system, and we do have a Congress member who will talk about his experience, but the message, quite frankly, is the same. Money, not ideas nor principles, but money reigns supreme in American politics. I want to thank you for having me today. I want to thank our moderator, Amy Loprest, as well as my fellow panelists, Dr. John Mollenkopf, Tom Petri, and one of the recommendations by Dr. Mollenkopf said if we had more Republicans, it would lead to a more robust system. Well, if we had more Republicans like Ulrich, my colleague and my friend, I think I would have a difficult time refuting that. He has a good spirit, and whenever we engage in debates, he doesn't take it personal, and he has a very good heart and a wonderful family, and he comes from a great part of Queens. I also like to thank NYU Law School, the Committee for Economic Development, the Brennan Center for Justice, and Federal Election Commissioner Ann Rabel for making this possible here today. We all lose when money influences elections and our body politic. You see, it was a natural progression for me to enter into politics. As a public interest attorney, I really wanted to affect change on a broader scale. You see, my sheroes were Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan, and I have committed my life to justice, simple, sweet justice. And I came from a hardworking family that believed in God and believed in the country, but we were a humble family, not wealthy, humble. And my father did not want me to enter into politics. In fact, he wanted me to marry a plumber. And that didn't work out. I'm still single. But the fact is I would not be in politics today if it were not for New York City's campaign finance system. I did not have a deep financial infrastructure upon which to draw upon. My friends are not ones I can tap into for big donations. When I first ran for city council, the first time I lost, as most of you know, to then Councilmember James Davis. And as most of you know, Councilmember James Davis was assassinated in City Hall. And I then ran as a third-party candidate on the Working Families line. I heard the applause. Thank you very much. And we won. I relied a lot upon working people, just regular working people, who knew about my record, knew about my activism, knew about my resume, and knew about all of my work in the community, particularly representing young people and victims of domestic violence. And without our city's public financing system, I likely would not have succeeded in my campaign for city council or for public advocate. My campaigns have been unique in that they have relied largely on small donations, and they have mostly been from the borough of Brooklyn, where I was born and raised and where I still live. In the runoff for public election, for public advocate, I didn't have a lot of the big money supporting me. And at times I wondered whether or not I was running against a senator from Brooklyn or the senator from Washington, D.C. My campaign was outspent 3-1, and I did not have any of the mainstream media support me in my efforts. And that's why I was and continue to be abundantly grateful for campaign financing, public financing. Average New Yorkers who believe in the power of grassroots fundraising have been my financial supporters. When ordinary New Yorkers put their hard-earned money into a campaign, they are not just donating their money, but putting their faith into candidates. And that means so much more to me than any big named check. The influence by moneyed interest in our body politic have diminished the voices of working and marginalized communities. And they threaten to undermine our democracy and our economic mobility. States with public financing have higher ratios of women and people of color elected to office. Creating a public financing system will allow even more women and people of color to run for office and allow more people to participate in our election system by helping fund campaigns through small donations. This would mobilize constituents to vote for candidates they feel truly connect to their concerns and political issues they care about. People who donate to elections are 3 times more likely to vote than people who do not. And larger voter turnout yields more accurate election results and ultimately makes our government more effective in representing its people. When the majority of campaign money comes from wealthy donors, then the only needs being represented are those of the wealthy. And when they're concentrated in Manhattan, in only a few zip codes, then all of the voices that are represented in this room and in the city of New York are not being heard. Public financing helps empower ordinary voters with a stronger and more direct opportunity to contribute to elections. Unfortunately, sometimes small donations simply cannot compete. The Supreme Court rulings of McCutcheon and Citizens United have opened the floodgates to unlimited money in our elections. And this is a system where our democracy is up for sale to those with the deepest pockets, hijacked by special interest, powerful special interest, moneyed special interest. And despite our state's reputation as a progressive leader, New York shamefully trails far behind many other states in the number of women elected to office. Women comprise 51% of the American population, but only represent 29% of elected officials at all levels of government. 100 elected officials out of 535 who serve in the Senate and House, only 100 are women. And in New York State, we rank 33rd in the nation for the percentage of women holding seats in the state legislature. In fact, out of 213 seats, only 55 are held by women. 34 in the Assembly, and 11 in the State Senate. No other measure except campaign finance can move the needle and directly impact and increase the number of women and people of color. Equality and democracy must be reflected in Congress, in our State House, City Council, in the halls of government. All voices must be heard. All voices must be represented so that we can live in a democracy and we can live in a world where ideas and principles should reign and not money. I thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Ulrich. I'm a Republican member of the City Council. I'm also on the endangered species list. I was elected 6 years ago in a nonpartisan special election. I was only 23 when I ran for City Council, and a week and a half after my 24th birthday, I was elected on February 24, 2009, to the City Council to represent a district in Queens that most people are familiar with because of Hurricane Sandy out in the Rockaways and Howard Beach and Broad Channel. I want to thank my fellow panelists, especially my good friend Tish James. She is a superb public servant and somebody who really is unafraid to stand up to the special interests and to people that are trying to undo a lot of the good government reforms that we put into place. And I consider her a very dear friend, and I'm honored to be asked to even sit on the dais with such other distinguished panelists today. They wanted me here, I guess, to balance it out so that it wasn't a bunch of progressive Democrats talking about progressive ideas. So I'm, so I'm very happy to be the token Republican. But more importantly, I'm even happier to be here to endorse and to support and to give my full recommendation to anyone who is contemplating running for office, participating in the Campaign Finance Board matching fund program, because if it were not for the CFB, I would have never been elected to the City Council. I was a 23-year-old kid from Ozone Park, for any of those of you who are familiar with Queens. I did not come from a political family. I came from a single-parent household. My mother was a teenage mother when I was born. I've never met my father to this day. We weren't a political family. We didn't come from money. Coincidentally, they were all Democrats. When I grew up and said I was Republican, that created a lot of anxiety in my own family. My grandfather, who was my treasurer, I'll get to that in a minute, was a union steam fitter, Local 638. My grandmother worked several jobs, including in the neighborhood laundromat on 101st Avenue, only a few blocks from where my office is now. So I'm very humble in that regard, and I'm not afraid of, I'm not ashamed of where I came from and how I got to where I am, and I'm very cognizant of that. Why was Campaign Finance Board so instrumental in my election? Well, first of all, I was just a kid. That's what people said at the time. But I had a lot of good ideas, and I was from the community, and I thought that I had something meaningful to offer and that I can run for office and make a difference in my community, and I can do it in a nonpartisan way, and that was very helpful, especially when you live in a 3-to-1 Democratic district. People were not able to judge me based upon the party label. They were able to judge me based upon who I was, what I had to say, and why I was running and why I wanted their votes. So once you were able to remove the stigma of being in a party that a lot of people are not particularly crazy about, especially at the time, people said, well, we like this young man. We like what he has to say. Nobody has their hooks in him yet. He doesn't owe anybody anything. I mean, these were some of the things that people, that when I met them on the street or at the subway or at their doorstep, they would say to me that they heard about me. But thanks to Campaign Finance Board, I also purchased a massive billboard on Liberty Avenue on the train station, on the A train in Rockaway Boulevard. That was quite famous. Nobody at that time had ever done anything like that. Matter of fact, I don't even think that you can advertise now on MTA-owned billboards for political campaigns. I think they've done away with that, but that was extremely helpful. Social media was incredibly helpful. The website was incredibly helpful. And the small donations that I was able to solicit from friends and people that I grew up with, and even people who are not interested in politics, but that just wanted, people who just wanted me to succeed. You know, their $50 at the time was matched 4-to-1, and now the incentive is even greater because it's a 6-to-1 match. And that gave me a level playing field, and that allowed me to compete with more seasoned, more established, more well-known candidates who are also running for that seat, and who many people predicted would win. I was not supposed to win, and I won the special election, and then I had to run again that November. And they said, oh, it's just a fluke. He's not going to win. He's just a kid. He's 24 years old. It's a mistake. He wasn't supposed to get it. He's a Republican. He's this. He's that. He doesn't have a, in Howard Beach, I didn't have a vowel at the end of my name. So, and then when you go to Rockaway, he's from the mainland. He's not from the Rockaway. So they had an excuse in every neighborhood why people shouldn't vote for me. But I did not pay attention to the people who said that I couldn't do it. I only surrounded myself with the people who believed in me, who supported me, who wanted me to win, and who wanted me to succeed. And I wasn't distracted by a lot of the people who never wanted me there to begin with. And I think that is incredibly important. But Campaign Finance Board was essential. A few points about participating in the program, though, that I think are critical here, and they cannot be overstated. I mentioned my grandfather, who since passed on. He had lung cancer, unfortunately. He was my treasurer in every single election that I had run in, and he was my treasurer. Why was he my treasurer? Well, you have to have the right person signing the checks. And I think a lot of people want to hire consultants, and they want to hire their buddies, friend who needs a job, who just got laid off, who was doing banking on the side, or whatever the case may be. You absolutely need someone that you can trust, someone that's going to learn the program, go to the training seminars, communicate on a regular basis with the liaisons that the CSB will assign your campaign. And he did that. He did it so well, by the way, that there were several things that he started in terms of the bookkeeping with my campaign that are now required for anybody running in the program. He was such a stickler. I mean, for me, he was more of a pain in the ass. But whenever I talked to people in the Campaign Finance Board, they said, oh, we loved Ronald Kulik. It was wonderful. He was one of the best treasurers. It was a pleasure dealing with him. Of course, he drove me insane for every receipt and every documentation and every note. But you need it. This is because you're dealing with the public's money. It's not your money. It's the taxpayers' money. It's the people's money. And consequently, when the campaigns were over, anything that we didn't use, we returned, because it wasn't my money. It's the city's money. It's the taxpayers' money. In my last re-election, I think I had close to $20,000. And when we paid down all of our liabilities, I went to the bank. I got a bank-certified check. And when I went to CFB, I brought them back this check for close to $20,000. And I think they always look shocked when that happens, because candidates try to spend as much as they can so they don't have to give everything back. But I never viewed it, I never abused it in that way, and I never saw it as that. I considered it a privilege that we have this wonderful program. It really is a model for how the state and federal elections should be conducted, in that we were able to compete and send out mail and communicate our message with the voters, and no one could outspend us or outdo us, because if they did, we would just get more money. That is really, really an important part of the Campaign Finance Board program, and it allowed someone like me, just a kid from Ozone Park, to get elected to the City Council 3 times. And I think that sometimes being in office, people become, I don't want to say jaded, but I think they forget what an enormous privilege it really is to sit in a chamber, to sit in a legislature and represent tens of thousands of people and be responsible for in some small way their destinies, the future of their families, their communities. That is not anything that I've ever taken for granted, and I don't think that anybody in public life should ever take that for granted. If they do, then they need to exit public office.